Hello. Welcome back to another episode on Reddit Stories. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe and leave a like. Let's get into the story now.
I 34F strongly feel my husband 37 meters hasn't forgiven my past affair and no longer loves me. I've been with my husband for almost 15 years, married 11 of them, and we have 2 young boys together. The reasons for stepping outside of my marriage has nothing to do with my husband, and it has nothing to do with the way I feel about him. I cheated for my own selfish reasons that I deeply regret every day. Some point after I turned 30 I felt bored with my life, kinda sad that I spent my 20s either in a committed relationship or raising 2 kids. Ending up as just another stay-at-home mom also kinda bugged me. Instead of bringing this up with my husband, I instead looked for the excitement outside of my marriage. I don't think the details are that important, just that he was an acquaintance in town that we'd known for a couple of years. It lasted for around 7 months but got physical for the last 4. My husband found out when he got suspicious of my behavior, although at the point he found out it had been over for a couple of weeks. For the next month or so lots of arguments occurred. Apologies on my part. Not sleeping in the same bed. Threats of divorce. Telling me it was over. Etc. After it boiled down, we sat down to talk it through and come to the conclusion this wasn't enough to tear us apart. That we'd get through it and a time would come where it'd seem like a distant memory. I suggested marriage counseling, but he refused at every turn, stating, "I don't want anyone knowing my business. I don't care if it's a stranger or not." Fast for 2 years to now, and our relationship feels completely different compared to before my affair. Our sex life took a while to get going again after the affair, but it's never been the same. It never feels passionate or as loving as it used to. He's completely stopped all forms of PDA, which even friends of ours have commented on. Little moments like cuddling on the sofa tends to happen only occasionally now, and it's never for too long before he'll move away. He puts off date night as much as possible. When sleeping in bed, he's almost always got his back turned to me. And just in general, his whole aura has changed. I don't feel like he's cold towards me, just that there's something missing. One of the things that's been bugging me this whole year is back in January he had an endoscopy performed as he was having very bad stomach pains. Which is very worrying because his dad died at 30 of bowel cancer, and stomach cancer runs in his family. I didn't even find out all this until days later, which has bugged me like crazy. Thankfully he had ulcers and he's being treated for it. The fact that I know he's terrified anytime he gets stomach pains and panics anytime he's in a hospital. But decided to go through it all on his own really hurts me. He didn't even tell me he had stomach pains, and the week leading up to him decided to get checked out, which shows me I've lost something major inside of him. No one in our personal lives knows any of this, so I have no one to seek advice from. I'm not sure what kind of advice I'm seeking, so anything is much appreciated. Thank you. Story 2. Am I the a-hole for laughing in my husband's face? So I have 32. I've been married to my husband M34 for 6 years. Before we got married, he had me sign a prenup stating that our financials would always be separate and the only thing we would share was an expense account to pay for household related fees. The reason for this was because he was making pretty good money and I was in graduate school, so my financial situation was pretty bad, but I signed nonetheless because I understood he wanted to protect himself. Anyway, fast forward to now. I've been out of school for about 4 years and I make more than 3 times as much as he does. I never asked how much he makes and he's never asked me either. Anyway, 2 weeks ago I told him that I was thinking about buying a new car, as one I had was really old since I had had it since my undergraduate days. He wasn't really interested and just told me to get whatever I liked. So a week ago I decided to make the plunge and get an Audi. I was pretty excited as I had always wanted one. At the time my husband was on a business trip. He got back yesterday and I showed him my car, was really happy for me. However, later he asked me what my monthly payments were, as the Audi was pretty new at this point. I told him that I had made the purchase in cash and that I had no monthly payments. He was taken back and asked with what money, and I answered that I made more than enough money to be able to afford it. He didn't talk after that and I thought that was that. However, after a few hours he came back to me and told that he thinks we should void the prenup. This is where I might be the asshole. I laughed in his face and asked him why I would agree to that, and his answer was that we're married and should share our financials. So I told him that we've been married for 6 years and yet we've never shared financials, and I was fine with what we were doing. And his sudden change of heart was very suspicious. He called me a bunch of names and stormed out and didn't come home, and I guess he told his family about our fight and they called to berate me and say how he supported me while I was in school. He didn't, and now I'm wondering if I was the asshole? Edit. I knew his salary when we got together. However, he's since gotten promoted, and at first when I used to ask, he would make comments that it was rude of me to ask how much he made, so I stopped. It's never really been interested in my career or job, and we don't bring our work home. The reason I make 3x what he makes, I made the assumption from what I knew his salary had been, is because I work as a CRNA and he works as a software engineer. Edit 2. I didn't expect so many comments. Thanks everyone for sharing your opinions. This post has really made me question everything in my life. I think I'm going to take a leave of absence from my work to sort out my life. My husband was only my second relationship, and I guess I was too caught up in school, work and debt to really see that my marriage was a sham. Am not blameless, which is hard to swallow. So I am going to have conversation with my husband and see where we go from here, if anywhere. Last edit. Since it's been a point of contention, I'm gonna clear up a few things. I make $175 an hour and work between 40 to 48 hours a week. From what I know, he made about $90K when we got together. I'm sure at higher. No, also works less hours. We live in a state that is not expensive, so my monthly contribution is about $1,000 to $1,200 a month. He had some property in Nice, so he wanted to protect that, and I had debt from school. He did too, but mine was bigger. Story 3. I lied to my husband years ago. I'm not proud of this. We have been married for 10 years and we dated for 2 years before we were married. Knew him in high school but never dated. Anyway, jump forward a few years and we meet back up again. We get together and do the whole dating/romance stuff. During this time, at some point we have the talk. You know, the talk about exes and stuff. He had a very vanilla life. 2x GF. No big deal. I told him that I had sex with 3 guys. We get married. Life is good. He has a good job and makes good money. He hates his new immediate supervisor, but who doesn't? Fast forward to this December and his company's Christmas party. I go with him and sit down at our table and start talking to friends of ours who work there, and he goes to get us drinks. He comes back and says, "Honey, I want you to meet Bob. He is my new supervisor." I look up and stare square in the eyes of an old FWB that I had from the time I was about 19 to 21. Now if you're doing the math, then you will take note that yes, there was overlap there. I stopped the FWB thing with him after my husband and I had been together for a while. In reality, we had only been dating about 8 weeks or so when I cut off the other, and even then it was only a few times. We lost touch with each other after a couple of years. Well, obviously he recognized me right away as well and immediately pulled me out of the chair and hugged me. He then sits down, starts talking and laughing and sadly drinking. He starts telling old stories and talking about old friends and really nothing too bad. My husband is sitting there but is totally oblivious to what is going on or who this guy is. Sadly, the more he drank, the more his conversation started to stray away from friends until he decides that now would be the time to remember the time we went skinny dipping in the local lake. Obviously that got my husband's attention. He then blurts out about making love on the hood of the car and how it warmed us up. Everybody at the table went dead silent and my husband looked like he was going to pass out. I just got up and walked out to the car. He never spoke to me on the ride home. He didn't speak to me in the house, and finally before we went to bed I made him talk to me. As you can imagine, he was upset. Did I mention that he hated his new supervisor prior to this event? He went to bed, but I do not think he slept any. As I'm getting up the next day, for whatever reason he comes to the conclusion that this wasn't one of the 3. Which it wasn't. Well, now he is starting to lose his shit but calms down and goes to work. That night I see him pull in the driveway and he is just sitting in the car. I go out and can tell right away he is crying. He never cries, or if he does, he goes someplace I can't see, which is where he thought he was. I open the door and get him to come inside. Long story short, Bob decided to lay it all on the line and tried to act like they had a connection and even told my husband they were Eskimo brothers. Bob is an asshole and he was back then as well. Anyway, he gets mad and tells me that I either come clean with him about everything or it was over between us. Then I start crying because I know this is going to kill him, but I know at this point I'm caught pretty much, so I let him know that there was a 1 in front of that 3. He is now a shell of his former self. He calls in sick to work all of the time when he had never done that before, and I know it's because he can't stand being there with Bob. He just basically mopes around the house and he has not touched me physically since that night. Every single time I try he just tells me no. Look, I get that this is deeply affecting him and I know I was wrong, but this is over a decade in the past. We've been married this whole time and we're very happy. I'm just afraid that he is going to either hurt himself. He's never said anything about that, but I worry, or hurt Bob, or he is just going to wither away. I'm also afraid he is going to be fired. I've suggested counseling, but he just mumbles about it. Anyone have any ideas how to snap him out of this? TLDR. Husband found out that his boss he hates was an old FWB of mine / I had hidden the past. Now he is pretty despondent. Update. Several things have happened since I first posted this. I decided that you guys were right about one thing. Counseling is going to have to come into play here, so I set up an appointment for us. I will ask him to go, but if he doesn't, which when you read later you will understand why he may not, then I am going to go for myself. I found myself turning into a person who I did not like this weekend, so I need some help myself. By late Sunday afternoon I guess I had just had it. He literally spent all day Saturday and up to that point all day Sunday sitting at the computer doing absolutely nothing. He would come to bed after I was asleep, and once he woke up he went right back onto it. If I would come and try and talk to him, he would answer as quickly as he could and return to ignoring me. I tried to get him to go out with me and work in the yard or take a ride or anything, and he just mumbled. I knew he was still having emotional issues with this, but for God's sake, it has been since the middle of December. It's time to get over it and start living again. So Sunday comes around and I try and make a nice dinner for us and figure that I am going to try and see if he won't talk to me. He comes out, puts his food on his plate and eats so fast that I haven't even gotten done with my salad before he is up walking back to the computer. I snapped. I walked in and unplugged the computer on him and sat down in a chair right in front of him and said that I was not giving him a choice. He was going to talk to me and we were going to work this out. He started to get up and I pushed him back in the chair, which I could tell aggravated him. He said that he doesn't understand why we need to talk. He just is trying to deal with things on his own. Which I then tell him how he is not doing this and that he has been a miserable asshole since the Christmas party and had ruined Christmas for both of our families because of his moping. He just mumbled about being sorry, but it was the only way he knew to deal with this. I wanted to know what this was. I already knew, but I wanted him to tell me. He just looked at me. He then said, "I can't look at you anymore," and got up and started to walk away. This is where I made a huge giant mistake. That I regretted when I did it, and I regret it now. I was so mad / hurt / emotional that I slapped him across the face. I didn't think it was that hard, but I left a red mark on his cheek. I immediately said I was sorry and then started crying. I've never seen him like this. My husband is a gentle man. He has never raised his voice to me in anger, nor has he ever done anything physical to me. Ever. He looked me in the eyes and he was not the man I know or love. This was a cold, heartless person who was looking at me. He grabbed me by the shirt with his left hand, lifted me into the air and told me that if I ever hit him again he would not care if I was a woman or not, he would knock my teeth out. He then put me down. I was terrified, but I was also still feeling guilty because I hit him first. He turned to leave and I begged him to stay. He asked why and I told him I still loved him, and then he started to laugh. He then said, "You mean like you said you loved me but then would turn around and go fuck Bob while I had to go home?" I didn't know what to say, but I figured him getting this off of his chest was a good thing, so I tried to let him talk. But he stopped, so I just said that I was young and confused. That did not go over well at all, however it did have the desired effect of getting him to talk. The problem with that though was that when he talked he knew way too many details about my time with Bob. He even once said, "Don't try and deny it because Bob will be happy to come here and confirm it." I was dumbfounded at first, but then mortified because it became very apparent that Bob told him everything, and I mean everything. Locations, times, and worst of all, things that I had done with Bob that I had not done with my husband. After letting him rant for about an hour, I decided to finally just ask, where do we go from here and how can we fix this? He said that he didn't know where we would go and did not believe this was fixable, at least in the sense that he can just forget about it. I told him that I missed being with him physically and that it was emotionally tearing me apart. He said that he was sorry if my feelings were hurt, but frankly the thought of being with me intimately made him ill. So we argued some more about that, and finally he admitted what I have suspected since that night. Had he known about Bob, then he would have never stayed with me, and the fact that I had lied about it and hidden it from him for so many years, on top of there being 10 more men I had slept with, has caused him to view me as a liar and a whore. This hurt me like nothing else ever has, to hear the man who I have loved with all of my heart for over 10 years to call me a whore and mean it. He wasn't being mean intentionally, but he honestly felt that way. In his defense, where we live, the community is very religious and conservative, and yes, he grew up in that life as well. So sex outside of marriage is frowned upon in general, but casual sex is pretty much taboo around here. Anyway, I asked how we were going to deal with it again. He said he didn't know. But he was going to sleep on the couch. I went bed and didn't sleep. I got up on Monday and he had already left for work. He was working the first shift, so I knew he would get off at 3. I decided that I was going to confront Bob at the office today because he just pretty much wrecked my marriage. My husband got off at 3 and I waited till I saw him pull away and marched inside the office to confront Bob. I marched right into the office area and walked right past the secretary to his office. He was startled to say the least. I proceeded to rip him an asshole for being a real dick about the entire thing and that he had effectively ruined my marriage. He told me that he didn't intend to do any harm. He thought my husband knew about him and though the easiest way to ease the tension over something like this was to make light of it. He said that my husband has never said anything contrary to him about the situation. I told him I didn't give a shit, but he was to stop talking about us to my husband, and in fact I told him I thought it was harassment. He said he would not say anything else to him about it. I left still pissed because the damage is done. Here is the worst part. As I was leaving from the floor below, I could hear the cat call from his coworkers asking me if I had come to give Bob another run and all other forms of vile, cruel things. I wanted to yell at them but instead burst into tears and ran out. My God, if this is what my husband has had to go through, it is no wonder he has been the way he is. I get home and his vehicle is not there. I go inside and taped on the TV is a letter telling me that he just can't deal with this. He is sorry for saying what he said to me and that he was very sorry for grabbing me. He said that for the next few days he is going to stay at a hotel outside of town so he can think, but that the reality of it is that he does not believe that this is something he can ever forgive or forget. He said that while we were planning on having a child this next year that he could not see going through with that, but he understood that I am getting to the point where I am losing years to do this in, so I needed to think about finding someone else. I am devastated. I called him and it went to voicemail. I sent him a text asking him to call me please. He just texted back saying that talking was the last thing he wanted to do tonight but promised to call me on Tuesday before work. He called me this morning and just told me he was going to work and that we can talk later. He calls me back at around 9:30 asking me why the fuck I went to his place of employment. He said had I not done enough to humiliate him. Now he is the laughing stock of the building because everyone has been telling him I went there to fuck Bob. He said Bob denied that, but frankly he didn't believe a thing either of us had to say. He then told me not to call him and when he contacts me next it will be to find out what lawyer I am using. I don't want this to be over. I still love him and the fact that he is in this much pain is killing me. Thank you for watching.